The candle has burned down to nothing twice tonight. I keep letting it go out. Then I light another one. Old habit from the war. A man gets comfortable with darkness after a while, learns to sit inside it without flinching. But tonight, I want the light. Tonight, I need to see what I'm writing. The journal is old. The leather cover is cracked along the spine, soft in the places my thumb has touched it most. I have kept this book for more years than I care to count. Most pages are ordinary things, weather crops the price of feed in town. The kind of notes a man keeps because writing things down makes them feel more real, more owned. But there are pages near the middle that I have read so many times the ink has started to fade. I always stop at the same place. Always. Outside, the wind is moving across the prairie the way it does this time of year, not angry, just steady like it has somewhere to be and is not in a hurry to get there. I can hear the grass bending, I can hear the horses shifting in the dark. And beneath all of it, faint but constant, I can hear the river. The river never stops. I set the journal down and pick up the necklace. Blue stone worn smooth, hanging from a cord of braided leather. I have held this thing so many times that it has taken on the temperature of my hand. It does not feel like stone anymore. It feels like something alive. There are footsteps outside the door. Small ones, quick the way children move when they think no one is listening. A small voice calls in through the wall, not in English. I answer in the same language. The footsteps slow. A pause. Then they move away toward the other side of the house, satisfied. I sit with that for a moment. 30 years ago, I did not speak a single word of that language. I did not know this land. I did not know that a river ran through it, or that a man could fall down beside that river and stay down, and that something waiting on the bank might reach out and pull him back. I did not know a great many things. I pick up the pen. If I am going to tell this story right, I have to start before the river. I have to start with what I had, because you cannot understand what I lost, and you cannot understand what found me after, unless you first understand what my life looked like in those years when everything was ordinary and good and mine. So, let me tell you about the farm. The land was not much to look at when I first saw it. This was the spring of 1871. I was 28 years old, and I had been out of the Army for 6 years, which sounds like a long time but was not nearly long enough. The war had ended in 1865, and I had come home to Virginia to find that home was no longer a place I recognized. Too many men I had known were not there. The ones who were had eyes like mine, distant, slightly delayed, as if we were always watching something the rest of the room could not see. I stayed in Virginia for 8 months. Then I could not stay anymore. I went west, because that is what men did when they needed to become someone new. The West did not care about your history. It did not care what you had done or what had been done to you. It only cared whether you could work and I could work. I had always been able to work. I came to the Kansas Territory with $40 a horse named Cooper, a rifle I rarely touched, and a piece of paper saying I had claim to 160 acres of land I had never seen. The Homestead Act. Lincoln's promise to ordinary men: work the land for 5 years and it is yours. The land was flat in a way that made Virginia feel crowded by comparison. The sky was enormous. The grass went on until it met the horizon, and then the sky took over, and you understood for the first time how small a man actually is in the world. I stood at the edge of my claim on a morning in April and felt the wind come through so clean and cold it hurt to breathe it. Cooper shifted under me, impatient. This is it, I thought. I did not feel hope exactly. I felt something smaller than hope. I felt the possibility of hope. And after the years I had come through, that was more than enough. I built the cabin that first summer. It was rough work. My hands bled through the first 2 weeks, and then the blisters hardened into calluses, and the calluses became part of me. The neighbors helped raise the walls. That was the way of it out there. You helped the man next to you because the land was too big and too indifferent for any one man to stand against it alone. Wade Callum was one of the men who helped raise my walls. He lived 3 miles east of my claim on land that ran along the same creek. He was 40 then, big through the shoulders with a jaw like the edge of a shovel. He was the kind of man who talked loudly at dinner and laughed at his own stories before he finished telling them. His wife had died 2 years before. He had no children. He brought me a ham the day I arrived. He showed me where the creek ran shallow enough to cross in dry season. He told me which of the other settlers to trust and which ones to watch. I trusted him. I had no reason not to. Sarah came into my life in the autumn of 1872, which was the second autumn I spent on the claim. She had come west with her father and two brothers from Ohio, and they had settled about 12 miles north of me on land that was better watered than mine. Her father raised her to work. She could break a horse, read a map sheet straighter than her brothers, and make bread that made a man feel like the world was fundamentally all right. We met at a harvest gathering at the Hendersons' place, a collection of neighbors who had been farming within 30 miles of each other long enough to call themselves a community. There was music badly played but enthusiastically. There was food. There was the particular warmth of people who have survived a hard season together and are celebrating the fact of their survival. Sarah was standing near the edge of the gathering when I first saw her, not avoiding the crowd, just watching it. The way she stood reminded me of how I sometimes stood a little apart, taking stock. I walked over. I do not remember exactly what I said first, something forgettable. She looked at me steadily and said something back that I have never forgotten, though I will keep it between the two of us. Whatever it was, it made me laugh, a real laugh, the kind I had not produced in longer than I could account for. We were married the following spring. The years that came after were the best years of my life. I will say that plainly. I am not a man given to exaggeration, and I am not saying it to make what came later feel worse than it was. I am saying it because it is true, and truth is the only thing worth writing down. Sarah had a way of humming when she worked, not real singing, just a low sound at the back of her throat that had no particular tune. She did it without knowing she was doing it. When I could hear that hum from somewhere in the house, I knew everything was all right. It was the simplest measure of a good day I have ever had. Thomas came in 1875. He had Sarah's eyes and my jaw, and a personality entirely his own, which declared itself loudly from the first week of his life and never changed. He was afraid of thunder and unafraid of everything else. He would walk up to animals that full-grown men would keep a respectful distance from the neighbor's bull. A badger he found near the creek, a rattlesnake once that I still cannot think about without my blood going cold, and he would crouch down and study them with the same serious expression he used for everything. He believed with complete conviction that horses understood human speech if you spoke slowly enough. I watched him one morning through the barn window standing next to Cooper, who was 13 years old by then and had the patience of something ancient. Thomas was talking to him in a low, careful voice, explaining something I could not hear what. Cooper stood with one ear turned toward the boy, not moving. I did not interrupt them. I had a family. I had a farm that was beginning to produce in earnest. I had neighbors I trusted, and land I understood, and mornings that began with the smell of coffee and the sound of a woman humming something tuneless in the kitchen. I had everything. The promise I made to Sarah happened on an evening in late September. The days were shortening. The light in the afternoon had that particular quality. It gets in autumn flat and golden and a little melancholy, like something beautiful in the act of leaving. We had finished the harvest. The hard part of the year was done. We were sitting on the porch after supper, Thomas already asleep inside, and the prairie was so quiet we could hear the creek from where we sat. Sarah said she wanted a longer porch, one that wrapped around the side of the house so she could watch the sunset from the west in summer and the river in the morning from the east. I told her I would build it in the spring. She looked at me with one eyebrow slightly raised. "Elijah, you said that last spring, and the spring before that. This time I mean it." "You meant it the other times too." "Yes, but this time I mean it more." She laughed. I loved the way she laughed, not delicate full like she had decided laughter was worth doing properly. She leaned against my shoulder. We sat like that for a while and did not say anything else because there was nothing else that needed saying. I did not build the porch that spring. I want you to understand that before I go on. I want you to hold that unbuilt porch in your mind while I tell you the rest of it, because that porch is the thing I have thought about more than any other single thing in the long years that came after. Not because of the wood and the nails, because of the promise, because of the way she looked when I made it and the way I felt when I said the words, which was certain and warm and completely unaware that I had exactly one more autumn to keep it. I have tried many times to write the night of October 14th, 1876. I have tried to write it straight, beginning to end, everything in order. I cannot do it that way. The mind does not store that kind of night in a straight line. It stores it in pieces, sounds, fragments of light and dark. The way certain moments are perfectly clear and other moments are simply gone, replaced by nothing, a blank space where memory should be. So I will write it the way I remember it, in pieces, because that is the only honest way. The horses. That was the first thing. Cooper always calm, always steady. Cooper was not calm. I came half awake to the sound of him in the barn, that particular sound a horse makes when something is wrong, not quite a scream but close to it, high and tight and urgent. Then the smell of smoke. I was on my feet before I was fully awake. The instinct from the war, certain sounds put a man upright before his mind catches up. I moved to the window. The east side of the barn was lit orange. After that, the sequence breaks apart. I know I went for my rifle. I know I shouted Sarah's name. I know there were men on horseback. I could hear them, could see the shapes of them against the firelight. 4 or 5 of them moving fast across the yard. I know I heard Sarah's voice call my name. Once. Only once. I know there was a shot. After the shot there was a ringing in my ears that seemed to get louder rather than quieter, and the world went narrow and then went away. I came back on my face in the dirt. The left side of my head was wet. The sky above me was beginning to lighten in the east, that cold gray that comes before actual dawn when the darkness has thinned but the light has not yet arrived. The barn was still smoking, the fire mostly eaten out, the smell of it hanging in the air so thick I could taste it. I lay there for a while. I am not sure how long. Long enough for the sky to go from gray to the pale, colorless white of early morning. Long enough for the ringing in my ears to settle into a single, sustained tone that I would carry with me off and on for years. Then I got up. I do not know how. My legs did not seem to belong to me. I walked toward the house and I went inside, and I will not say what I found there except to say that the people I loved were gone, and I understood with a certainty that had no hope in it at all that they were not coming back. I went back outside. I stood in the yard for a long time. The morning kept arriving whether I wanted it to or not. The light filling in like water, ordinary and indifferent and unstoppable. My rifle was on the ground near the porch steps. I picked it up. I stood with it for a while. I thought about what I could do with it. Then I set it down again. Not because I was afraid, not because I was a good man in that moment. I set it down because I looked at the yard, at the smoke and the silence and the ruin of the life I had built, and I realized that I did not know what I was alive for. A man who does not know what he is alive for does not have a reason to do much of anything, not even the things he has the most right to do. I heard the sound from the dark then, just before they rode away. One of the men still moving along the tree line at the back of the property, saying something to the others, his voice low and businesslike. I knew that voice. I had heard that voice at my dinner table. I had heard it telling bad jokes and laughing too loud and explaining which direction the creek ran in dry season. Wade Callum. I stood with that knowledge in the ruined yard of my farm while the sun came up, and I did not move, and I did not make a sound, because there was nothing inside me at that moment that knew how to make sound. There was just the knowledge and the mourning and the ringing in my ears and the smell of smoke. That was all that was left of me. I want to tell you about the 4 months that followed, but the truth is that they are the hardest to tell. Not because they were worse than that night. Nothing was worse than that night. They were hard to tell because they were so empty. A man in genuine grief is not dramatic about it. He does not rage against the sky. He does not weep at sunsets. He gets up in the morning and he moves through the day, and somewhere in the middle of the day he realizes he has been staring at the same fence post for 20 minutes without thinking anything at all. That is what grief actually feels like. Not a storm, a hole. I left the farm the next day. I had nowhere to go and no reason to go there, but I could not stay in that yard, in that house, surrounded by the ordinary objects of the life that had been there and was now gone. Sarah's apron hanging by the door, Thomas's small boots by the hearth, things that had no right to be so intact when everything else had been taken apart. I went west. It was the only direction I knew. I will not catalogue the towns. I worked where I could find work. I slept where I could find a roof. I ate when I remembered to eat, which was not always. People would speak to me and I would answer, but the answers were automatic things, hollow the way an echo is the shape of a sound without being the sound itself. I did not speak of what had happened to anyone. There was no one to speak to who would understand it, and anyway the words for it had not come back to me yet. I had lost language somewhere in that morning, not the words themselves, but the feeling that words meant anything. Cooper was still alive. That surprised me sometimes. He was an old horse and he had been through a hard night, and he was still here, still walking. Every morning I put the saddle on him and he stood for it, and we went another day. I think he was the only reason I kept counting mornings. It was a Tuesday in late October when his leg gave out. I have never been a superstitious man, but I have noticed looking back that Tuesdays had a particular habit of changing the direction of things. I do not know what to make of that. I have decided not to make anything of it because a man who starts finding meaning in days of the week is a man with too much time and too little to occupy it. Still, I have noticed. We were somewhere in the Kansas Territory far enough west that the towns had stopped being regular, moving toward land that was more open and more austere and less interested in whether you had a name or a destination. The trail we were following ran along a small creek. There was a root hidden in the grass, and Cooper's right foreleg came down on it wrong, and I heard the sound, and I knew immediately what kind of sound it was. I got down, and I examined the leg. The bone was not broken. It was a bad sprain, deep in the tendon, the kind that needed rest and wrapping and time. I had the wrapping. I had the time. I had nothing to be in a hurry toward. I worked slowly, more slowly than the job required. I cleaned the leg and I wrapped it and I checked the wrapping twice. Cooper turned his head and put his nose against my shoulder very gently, the way he had done since he was 3 years old, and I had first taught him what I was. I sat beside him in the grass for a while. "All right," I said. It was the first thing I had said out loud in several days. My voice was strange to me, rough, low, like something that had not been used in a long time. One more day. I did not know who I was saying it to. Him, myself. The particular empty sky above the Kansas Territory that did not care one way or the other. One more day. That night I dreamed about Thomas for the first time since the farm. Not a nightmare. Just Thomas running through the wheat field, laughing at something I could not see. Running the way 4-year-olds run with their whole bodies, arms going completely committed to the act of moving fast. He looked back at me once. He said something I could not hear. I woke before dawn and lay on my back and looked at the stars, which were enormous and cold and very close. I thought, if you could see me right now, what would you think of me? No answer came, but I lay there until the stars began to fade and the sky went from black to deep blue and the birds started their morning argument in the creek willows, and eventually I got up and put the saddle on Cooper and we kept going. 2 weeks later we came to the river. The river had no name that I knew. It was wider than the creek I had been following, moving with enough purpose to have carved its way down through the softer rock on the eastern bank, leaving a low cliff face about my height, dark stone streaked with mineral orange. On the western side, the bank was gentler grass coming down to the water's edge, cottonwood trees growing in a loose congregation at the bend where the current slowed. It was a Tuesday afternoon in mid-November. The sky was the particular blue of late autumn, cold and deep and clear, the kind of sky that makes distances feel honest. There it was again. The cottonwoods had gone to gold. Some of the leaves had already fallen and were moving on the water in slow circles where the current eddied near the bank. Cooper smelled the water and moved toward it without waiting for direction from me. His leg had improved in the 2 weeks since the sprain. Not healed, he still favored it on rough ground, but better. Functional. We came to the western bank and I let him drink. I got down and cupped water in my hands and drank too cold enough to hurt tasting of stone and distance. I wet my face and the back of my neck. I sat on a rock near the water and looked at the current and did not think much. I do not know how long I sat there. The light was getting lower, the sun moving behind the line of low hills to the west, when Cooper's head came up suddenly. He was looking south along the bank ears, forward the particular rigid attention of an animal that has heard something. I listened. Distant. A horse moving fast. Not a walking sound. Something urgent in the rhythm, irregular the gait of an animal that was not moving right. I was on my feet. A man appeared at the bend in the river, coming fast through the cottonwoods on a gray horse that was moving badly, favoring its left side, breathing hard. The man was upright in the saddle, but only barely. He was dressed in trail clothes, dark canvas coat, worn through at the elbows, a hat that had lost its shape. He was covered in the particular gray dust of long travel, and even from a distance I could see that the dust was not the only thing darkening his coat. The gray horse made it another 20 yards. Then its legs went out. The man did not jump clear. He went down with the horse, hit the ground on his left side, rolled once, and did not get up. He lay still. The gray horse struggled to its feet, the instinct of prey animals to get vertical to be ready to run. But the horse was spent. It stood where it had fallen, head hanging, sides heaving, one foreleg trembling. And around the man on the ground the grass was getting darker. I should have stayed where I was. I should have gotten back on Cooper and gone around the bend and kept moving north. A man bleeding by a river in empty country in 1876 was not my business. He was trouble of a kind I had no resources left to absorb. I had nothing, no medicine, no money, no surplus of any kind, including the emotional kind. I was carrying enough of my own darkness to fill a considerable room. Every reasonable thing in my mind said, "Keep moving, Elijah." But I was already walking toward him. I do not know why. I have thought about this many times in the years since lying awake in the dark, and I have not found a clean answer. Maybe it was the horse, the way the gray was standing over him, head down still. There was something in that image I could not walk past, something in the loyalty of it. An animal that could have gone anywhere, staying. I knelt beside the man and put my hand on his shoulder. "Hey," I said. Nothing. I rolled him carefully onto his back. His face was a map of damage cuts across the left cheekbone, a bruise spreading up from his jaw, dried blood from somewhere above his hairline. Under the dust his skin was a color that concerned me. The wound in his side was the serious one. I could see it without looking hard. Something had gone in and been removed, or had grazed along the ribs, tearing rather than piercing. It was not clean. I was looking at the wound, thinking about what I had in my saddlebag that could help when the man opened his eyes. I did not expect it. They were dark eyes, so dark the iris and the pupil were almost indistinguishable in the low light, and they were looking at me with a clarity that seemed impossible given the state of the rest of him. Not confused, not afraid, just looking, steady and direct the way an animal looks at something it is trying to understand. I do not know what she saw when she looked at me. I know what I felt when I met her eyes, though it took me years to find the words for it. I had been looked at by a great many people in the months since the farm. People who looked past me, through me, at the space I occupied without seeing the man inside it. This was different. This was someone looking at me, as if I were a question worth the trouble of answering. She was younger than I had first registered the trail dust and the serious expression having aged her. She was dressed practically in clothing suited to work, and movement, her dark hair tied back. Around her neck were several strands of beads in a pattern I did not know. In her hand, which I had not noticed until now, she held a cluster of plants, dried herbs and roots, the gathered materials of someone who had come here with a purpose before she found me. She had been watching me for longer than I knew. She looked at me without speaking, without moving. Then she looked at my hands, at the way I was already pressing the folded cloth of my jacket against the wound in my side, instinctively doing the right thing. She looked at that for a moment. Then she stood up, fast and decisive, moving with the kind of purpose that does not waste motion. I thought she was leaving. She was not leaving. She was running toward the tree line, moving at a speed that told me she was going somewhere specific, that she knew exactly where she was going and why. I turned back to the man on the ground, back to myself. I suppose I should say, since it is strange to tell this part from the outside, though the journal demands it. I was barely there. The eyes had closed again. The breathing was the shallow, insufficient breathing of someone losing the argument with consciousness. I looked down at the man I would become, or rather the man I had already been, and I did not yet know the first thing about the life that was waiting for me on the other side of what was about to happen. I only knew that a woman had not run away. And in the 4 months I had been moving through the world like a ghost, not one person had stayed. The last of the light left the river. The current moved south, steady and dark and quiet, carrying the golden cottonwood leaves away on the surface of the water, moving them downstream toward somewhere none of us could see. I pressed the cloth harder against the wound, and I waited. Above me the first stars appeared. I was unconscious for 3 days. I know this because moonlight told me later, and because the journal I kept in the weeks after confirms it, though the first entries are written in a hand I barely recognize as mine, the letters unsteady, the lines wandering across the page like a man trying to walk on unfamiliar ground. What I remember of those 3 days is not memory exactly. It is more like the impression a heavy object leaves in soft earth, the shape of something without the thing itself. I remember sound before anything else. There was a woman's voice, low and rhythmic, not quite singing. The same phrase repeated at intervals, the way water finds the same channel again and again. I did not understand the words. I did not need to. The voice was the sound of something being held together. The way a hand pressed against a wound is not a cure, but is the difference between bleeding out and surviving long enough for something better to arrive. I remember the smell of fire and the smell of something green, medicinal, sharp at the edges. I remember a hand on my forehead, dry and cool and deliberate. I remember the particular darkness behind closed eyes that tells you it is day, different from the darkness of night, warmer with a reddish quality when the light comes through the eyelids. And I remember another voice, different from the first, younger, speaking in the same language but with different rhythms, quicker, softer, with pauses in it that felt like questions. I did not understand those words either, but the pauses were questions. I knew the shape of someone asking things they were not sure they wanted the answer to. I lay and listened to that voice for what seemed like a long time. On the 3rd day, I opened my eyes and kept them open. The inside of the tent was smaller than I expected. The walls were hide stretched taut over a framework of poles, and they let in a diffuse amber light that made everything look like late afternoon regardless of the actual time. Bundles of dried plants hung from the upper frame. Clay pots of various sizes were arranged along one wall. A fire burned low in a central pit, the smoke finding its way up through the opening at the top with the efficiency of long practice. Sitting cross-legged near the fire, watching me with no particular expression, was an old woman. She was very old, the kind of age that has gone past looking old and arrived at something else, something more architectural. The face reshaped by decades into a new kind of structure. Her white hair was braided and lay over one shoulder. Her eyes were dark and absolutely still and gave nothing away, which I would later learn was simply how she was. Gray clouds saw everything and revealed what she chose to reveal, which was rarely the whole of it. She looked at me for a moment. Then she turned and said something toward the entrance of the tent. A pause. Then the sound of movement outside. Then the entrance flap was pushed aside and she came in. I had expected to see her again. Somewhere in the fog of those 3 days, I had held on to the image of her face, the directness of her gaze, the purposeful way she had moved. What I had not expected was how different she looked here in her own place, with the amber light of the tent fire on her face and the noise of a living community just outside the walls. She looked like someone who knew exactly where she was. She crossed to the other side of the fire and sat. She looked at me the way she had looked at me on the riverbank, the same quality of attention, direct and without performance. Then she spoke. "Where are you?" The English was precise. not accented the way I expected. Clean and careful, the English of someone who had learned it deliberately rather than absorbed it carelessly. My mouth was very dry. I tried to answer and produce something that was not quite a word. She reached for a clay cup near the fire and brought it to me. I drank. Water with something added that tasted of bark and something else I could not name. It was the best thing I had tasted in longer than I could account for. "You are in the village of my father," she said. "You are safe." I looked at her. I looked at the old woman by the fire who had not moved and was still watching me with those geologic eyes. I looked at the dried plants overhead, the clay pots, the low amber light. I said the first coherent thing that had come out of my mouth in 3 days, "My horse." Something shifted in her expression, not quite a smile, more like the recognition of something, as if I had answered a question she had not asked aloud. "He is eating grass," she said, "outside." I put my head back down. The ringing in my ears, which had been with me since the night of the farm, was quieter here, not gone but reduced, as if the walls of the tent were muffling something more than wind. I said, "My name is Elijah." She looked at me for a moment. "I know," she said, though I had not yet told her, and I have never found out how. Her name, she told me on the 4th day, was Moonlight. Not the English word, she told me the word in her own language, first the sound of it, which I will not write here because some things belong to the people they come from and should not be pinned to a page by an outsider's hand. But she told me the meaning was something like moonlight, the particular light that falls when the moon is full and the sky is clear and the prairie opens itself up to a brightness that is softer than day, but stronger than dark. "Your father gave you that name?" I asked. "My mother," she said, "before she died." She did not say it with grief exactly. She said it the way you state a fact about the weather. "It rained in April, my mother is gone." Not without feeling, but without the expectation that the feeling would be shared or requires acknowledgement. It was simply part of the landscape of her life, and she had lived in that landscape long enough to have learned its geography. I did not offer condolences. I had the sense she would have found them unnecessary. "Your father is the chief," I said. I had gathered this from the way people spoke around the tent, the particular quality of respect that surrounded his name. "Red Eagle," she said. "Yes." "And he allowed you to bring me here." She considered this. "He allowed it after it was done. That is not quite the same thing." I looked at her. "What did he say?" "He asked me why." "What did you tell him?" She was quiet for a moment. Outside I could hear the sounds of the village voices, children, the movement of animals, the particular percussion of people going about their daily work. A living place. I had not been inside a living place in a long time. "I told him I did not know," she said finally. "I told him I only knew that I had to." She said it without embarrassment, as a statement of fact, the way she said most things. I lay with that for a while. Outside, a child laughed, a bright, piercing sound, quickly gone. "Thank you," I said. She looked at me steadily. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "You are not well." She was right about that. The wound in my side healed slowly. Gray cloud changed the dressing twice a day with preparations I could not identify, things that smelled of earth and something faintly bitter, things that drew the heat out of the wound and left it feeling, if not exactly clean, then at least quieter. She did not speak to me during these changes and did not seem to require me to speak to her. She worked with the efficient attention of someone who has done a great many hard things and learned not to be sentimental about any of them. On the 5th day, I was allowed to sit up. On the 7th day, I walked outside. The village was larger than I had understood from inside the tent. Several dozen structures arranged with a logic I did not immediately grasp, open space at the center activity. Everywhere women, working men moving with purpose, children in the constant background motion of children who have not yet learned to keep still. Horses in a rough enclosure at the southern edge, perhaps 30 of them moving slowly in the morning light. Everything stopped when I came out. Not dramatically. The work did not cease, the voices did not go silent. But attention shifted the way attention does when something unusual enters a space. the slight recalibration of bodies, the angle of eyes, the half-pause before resumption. I was the unusual thing. I stood in the entrance of the tent and let them look at me, and looked back and did not speak because there was nothing useful I could say. An older man emerged from a larger structure across the open space. He walked toward me without hurry, which I had already learned was the way of it. Here deliberate movement, economy of gesture, the purposefulness of people who have learned that the land they live on will not be rushed, and neither will they. He was perhaps 60, carrying himself with the specific gravity of a man accustomed to being the point around which things organized. His face had the quality of the land weathered and composed with a stillness in it that suggested this was not a man you would easily surprise. He stopped about 10 feet from me. We looked at each other. He said something in his language. Then he waited. He says, "A wounded man came to our land. We healed him. That is our way." Moonlight was beside me. I had not heard her come out. "When you are fully recovered," she continued, "a decision will be made." The chief, her father, Red Eagle, watched me while she translated. His expression gave nothing specific away, but it was not hostile. It was the expression of a man gathering information, withholding judgment until the information was sufficient. I looked at him. "Tell him thank you," I said. She said something. He listened. Then he said something back brief, and turned and walked away. "What did he say?" I asked. Moonlight watched her father walk. He said, "Thank me when you have done something worth thanking for." I stood there in the November light and thought that was about the most honest thing anyone had said to me in years. The man who first accepted me was not the chief. He was an old man called Quiet River, who was in charge of the horses, and he accepted me not through any formal declaration, but through the simple act of not telling me to leave when I showed up at the enclosure on my 8th day in the village. I had come because I needed something to do. Stillness had never been easy for me. Even in the worst months after the farm, the emptiness had been an active thing, a motion that went nowhere rather than a rest. And I had been around horses since I was old enough to stand beside one without falling over. I knew what to do with horses. I came to the enclosure in the early morning and stood at the fence rail and looked at the animals. Quiet River was already inside, moving among them, checking legs and hooves with the methodical attention of a man who has done this every morning for decades. He saw me. He continued what he was doing. I opened the gate and went in. He watched me from across the enclosure. I went to the nearest horse, a roan mare, who had turned to look at me with ears pricked forward assessing, and I stood beside her and waited. Not reaching for her, just present, giving her time to make up her own mind about me. She stretched her nose forward and breathed on my hand. I heard Quiet River make a sound, not a word more like a short exhalation that acknowledged something. He turned back to the hoof he was examining. I began to work. No one asked me to. No one thanked me. Quiet River and I spent that first morning in the enclosure without speaking a word to each other, because we did not share language, and because the work did not require speech. It required attention and steadiness and patience, and those things crossed whatever line existed between us without any translation at all. At midday, he handed me a piece of dried meat from the bag at his belt. I took it. That was how it started. I was aware of Black Bear from the beginning. You could not be in that village and not be aware of him. He occupied space differently than the other men. More of it claimed more loudly, the kind of presence that arranged itself at the center of any group it joined. He was perhaps 29, powerfully built, moving with the controlled energy of someone who trained his body the way a carpenter trains his hands deliberately, specifically for a purpose. He watched me from a distance in those early days, always watching. His expression was not the guarded neutrality of the chief or the careful openness of Quiet River. It was something more pointed. An assessment, but not of whether I could be useful. An assessment of whether I was a problem. I understood gradually the shape of the situation. Moonlight had told me very little directly. But the village was not a silent place, and attention teaches you things. I watched and I listened, and I began to understand. She had refused men for 5 years. Many men. Warriors from this village and others men who had traveled significant distances and arrived with significant offerings, men whose qualifications by any measure the world around them recognized were more than adequate. She had refused them all with the same steady calm with which she did everything without explanation and without apology. The village had opinions about this. I could hear it in the texture of the air around her when she walked through the way. Conversations adjusted the way older women's eyes followed her measuring. She walked through all of it with her head at the same level, her pace unchanged, as if the opinions were weather, and she had dressed appropriately for weather. Black Bear had been the most recent, the most persistent, the one the village had collectively expected to succeed where the others had failed because he was the best they had in the ways that were measurable. The strongest, the most respected, the most decorated in whatever the equivalent of decoration was in that place. She had said no to him too, and then shortly after that last refusal a man had appeared on the bank of the river, bleeding from his side, and she had not run and had come back with gray cloud instead of warriors, and here I was. I did not flatter myself that I understood what that meant. I barely understood what I was doing there at all, but I understood Black Bear's eyes when they settled on me. I had seen that look before, not here but in other places, other lives. It was the look of a man who has done everything right and is watching the result go to someone who has done nothing right at all. The look of a man trying to understand a world that is not following its own stated rules. I did not blame him for it. In his position I might have looked at me the same way. It was a Tuesday evening in late November when moonlight first sat beside me at the fire. I had been in the village for nearly 3 weeks. The wound in my side was healing, not healed, but the serious conversation with Death had concluded, and Death had agreed to wait for now for some future occasion. I could walk without the gait of a man trying not to disturb something fragile. I could work a full morning with the horses. The evenings were the hard part. I had nothing to do with the evenings. In my previous life I had spent evenings with Sarah, with Thomas, with the particular domesticity of a family at the end of a day. The lamp lit the fire, made the conversation of people who know each other well enough that silence is as comfortable as speech. That life was gone. What was left in its place was just time unstructured with too much room in it for things I did not want to think about. I sat by the community fire every evening and looked at the flames, and did not talk to anyone because I did not share a language with most of them, and the one who shared my language I did not quite know how to approach. That evening she appeared beside me without preamble. She sat. She did not speak immediately. The fire between us crackled and shifted and sent sparks up into the dark sky. Around us the village was doing its evening things, cooking, talking the sounds of a community settling toward sleep. We were in it, but not quite of it, the two of us sitting in a pocket of quiet at the edge of all that living. Several minutes passed. Then she said, "You were a soldier." It was not a question. I looked at her. She was looking at the fire. Her profile was very still. "Yes," I said. "Which war?" "The one between the states, the blue and the gray. You know it." "My father knew of it," she said. "He said it was a war about who owned people." That is one way to say it. Is there another way? I thought about it. There are many other ways. Most of them miss the point. She looked at me then briefly with something that might have been the beginning of a smile at the corner of her mouth. Then she looked back at the fire. "How long ago?" 11 years. I was 20. "Did you kill people?" She said it the way Gray Cloud changed dressings without sentimentality, as a practical matter that required an honest answer. "Yes," I said. "Do you feel bad about it?" I stopped. I thought about what I actually felt, which I had not examined carefully in some years, because examining it carefully was not useful. I feel that the world made situations where the right answer was to kill someone, and I regret that those situations existed. Whether I regret what I did inside them, I stopped again. That is harder to answer. She was quiet for a moment. That is an honest answer, she said finally. I try not to say things I don't mean. She looked at me directly. Most people do not try that. We sat for a while longer. The fire was burning lower. Across the circle I could see Black Bear standing at the edge of the light, not quite inside the warmth of it, watching. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "You can ask." "Why didn't you run? On the riverbank, when you found me?" She was quiet for long enough that I thought she was not going to answer. Then she said, "You were covering your horse." "What? When you fell, you turned so you fell against the horse, not away from it. To cover it. To protect it." She paused. "You were almost dead, and you were still thinking about your horse." I had not known I had done that. I had no memory of it. "You had never seen a man like me before," I said. "A white man in your village." "I had seen men like you before," she said. "Passing through, trading. Some of them were looking for trouble and some of them were not. You were not looking for anything." She looked at the fire. "A man looking for something always shows it in his eyes. You were not looking for anything. You were just—" She stopped. "Finished," I said. She looked at me. I was going to say gone somewhere, but yes, finished is also true. We sat in silence after that. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who have said something true and are giving it room. After a while she stood to go. "My name is Moonlight," she said, not in English, in her own language. The sound of it. She had told me the word before, but she said it again now, and somehow it was different this time, said at night, with the fire low and the stars very large overhead. "I know," I said. She looked at me. The corner of her mouth moved again. Then she was gone back into the dark of the village, and I sat alone with the dying fire and tried to remember the last time I had felt something other than the specific weight of what I carried. I could not quite remember, but I was aware sitting there of something very small, no larger than a coal in a banked fire, the kind of thing you could miss entirely if you were not paying attention. A warmth that had nothing to do with the flames. I paid attention to it. The afternoons by the river began without ceremony. I went to the river most afternoons because the river was the one place in the village's surroundings that felt neutral to me, not belonging to anyone, not requiring me to navigate anything social, just water moving south over stones with complete indifference to my history. I went there and sat and sometimes skipped stones and sometimes just watched the current and tried not to think too deliberately about anything. She came the first time, I think, because she genuinely needed to collect something from the bank medicinal plants, the kind that grew in the damp soil near the water. She was not there because of me. She worked her way along the bank with the focused attention she brought to everything cutting and bundling, and when she was close enough she sat down near me on the rocks and kept working. I did not say anything. She did not say anything. After a while she said, "Do you know what this is, holding up a plant?" "No." "Gray Cloud uses it for fever, the roots boiled in water." She turned it in her fingers. "She says it has been used this way longer than anyone can remember, longer than the oldest stories." "Does it work?" "You are alive," she said simply. After that we talked more. Not always about important things, sometimes about the river, the way the level changed through the seasons, where it flooded in spring and where it dropped to bare rock in late summer. Sometimes about the horses, which she knew as well as Quiet River, having grown up among them. Sometimes about nothing much, the kind of conversation that is really just the practice of being comfortable in someone else's presence. I told her about Thomas one afternoon. Not the end of Thomas, just Thomas. The stone collection he kept under his pillow. The conviction about horses and human speech. The way he had looked standing beside Cooper that morning I had watched them through the barn window, so small and so serious. She listened without interruption. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "He sounds like someone worth knowing," she said. It was exactly the right thing to say. Not sorry for your loss. Not the formula of condolence that people reach for because it is easier than engaging with the actual person who was lost. She had heard what I said and responded to the child I had described rather than to the fact of his absence. "He was," I said. We sat for a while with that. Then she said, not looking at me, "For 5 years men have come here to ask my father for my hand. Many men, strong men, brave men, men who would be good husbands by any measure anyone here would use." "I know," I said. I had figured some of it out. And I said no to all of them. I figured that out too. People in the village think I am too proud, that I want something impossible. She was picking up a stone from the bank, turning it in her fingers round dark water smoothed. My father worries. He thinks I am broken in some way he does not know how to fix. Are you? She considered this seriously. No, I am not broken. I am. She paused. I am very particular about certain things. And one of the things I am particular about is this: I can see what is inside people when I look at them. I cannot explain how. I have been able to do it since I was very young. My mother was the same, Gray Cloud says. She set the stone down. And when I looked at all those men, what I saw inside them was... She searched for the word. Wanting. They were full of wanting. They wanted to be the one who got the chief's daughter. Or they wanted to prove something to the other men. Or they wanted... She made a gesture I could not fully interpret. Just the having of something. Not the person, I said. She looked at me. Yes. I looked at the river. And when you looked at me, I said, what did you see? She was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I thought she was not going to answer, that I had asked something I should not have asked, moved too fast or too far into territory that was not mine to be in. Then she said, still looking at the water, I saw someone who was not wanting anything. Not anything. She picked up the stone again, turned it, set it down exactly where it had been. And for the first time in 5 years, she said very quietly, my heart was not silent. I did not answer. There was nothing to answer with that would not be too much or too little, that would not disturb the particular stillness of what had just been said. The river moved past us. The cottonwoods shifted in the afternoon wind. After a while I reached out and placed my hand very briefly on hers, 1 second, maybe 2, and then took it back. She did not move away. There was one afternoon that did not go well. We had been talking about the horses. She knew them as well as Quiet River in some ways, better having grown up among them since she could walk. She was describing how the roan mare behaved in cold weather, and she was using her hands the way she sometimes did when words in either language felt insufficient, and I was watching her hands when I noticed the pieces along her wrist. Small carved things, bone or ivory strung on a fine cord and worn close to the skin. The pattern in them was intricate, not decorative exactly, more purposeful, the kind of careful work that takes time and means something beyond its appearance. I had seen similar pieces on other women in the village, but had not looked closely. I reached toward them without thinking. The way you reach toward something that interests you. No calculation in it. Just the automatic movement of a curious hand. She pulled her wrist back. Not dramatically, not with anger. A single clean withdrawal, the way you move a flame away from something that should not burn. She looked at me directly, and in her expression there was no accusation, only the clear statement of a boundary that existed entirely independent of the person who had just crossed it. I understood immediately that I had done something wrong. I did not know what exactly. I pulled my hand back and sat with the wrongness of it, trying to locate the specific shape of the error. I apologize, I said. I did not know. She looked at me for a moment. Those are not for outside eyes, she said. They belong to my mother. She said it without elaboration, not to make me feel worse, simply because that was the complete explanation, and she did not add words to things that did not require them. I understand, I said. I did not fully understand, not yet, not the depth of what I had reached toward, but I understood enough to know that understanding fully was going to take longer than an afternoon, and could not be rushed into being by asking questions. We sat for a few minutes in a quiet that was different from our usual quiet. The usual quiet between us had become comfortable over the weeks, the silence of two people who have stopped needing to fill space with sound. This quiet had an edge to it, not hostility, something more like the particular tension of a moment that has revealed a distance neither person knew was there. After a while she stood. "Tomorrow," she said simply, and walked back toward the village. I stayed by the river until the light went. I skipped stones badly. I have never been skilled at it, which Thomas found endlessly amusing. the one physical task his father was genuinely poor at, and I thought about what I had done and how to address it without making it into something larger than it was or smaller than it deserved. The next afternoon I came to the river with a stone I had pulled from the shallows that morning, round, dark, worn smooth by years of current doing its patient work. I set it on the bank in front of her when I sat down, not with ceremony, just placed it there between us and looked at the water. She looked at the stone. She looked at me. She picked it up and turned it in her fingers the same way she had turned the other stone, the one she had used to explain herself weeks ago when she told me what she saw when she looked at the men who came before me. She set this new stone down in front of her, not back between us, on her side of the space. She kept it there for the rest of the afternoon. Neither of us mentioned it again. Neither of us needed to. There are some apologies that work better as objects than as words, and some distances that close not through explanation but through the simpler act of showing up the next day and sitting down as if the distance were a thing that could be crossed by presence alone. It can be. I have found that to be generally true. We stayed until the cottonwoods went dark against the sky and the first stars appeared above the eastern ridge, longer than usual, as if we were both making up for the time the previous afternoon had cost us, paying it back into the account of the days we had built together by the river. When she stood to go, she did not say tomorrow. She said, "The mare will foal in the spring. Quiet River thinks twin." I looked at her. "Is that unusual?" "Very," she said. "He says it happens once in a long while. When it does, the second one is always the stronger." She walked back toward the village. I sat for another few minutes and thought about that, and about second chances, and about the particular patience of things that take a long time to become what they are going to be. Then I went in. The trouble with Black Bear arrived on a morning in early December. I was working in the horse enclosure, a cold morning, the first real cold of winter settling into the ground, my breath making small clouds in the still air. Quiet River was nearby doing something with a length of rope, his movements as economical and unhurried as always. I heard Black Bear before I saw him. Not because he was loud, he was not loud. He moved with precision and deliberateness the way men move when they have decided something. The sound I heard was his footstep at the enclosure gate, a specific weight to it. He came inside. He stood perhaps 15 feet from me. I straightened up and turned to face him. He was in his full bearing that morning, dressed for impression, the posture of a man who has decided to make something explicit. Behind him I was aware of other eyes. The activity of the village had not stopped, but it had shifted. People who were working nearby had found reasons to work more slowly. He spoke. His voice was measured and cold and carried the particular authority of a man who is accustomed to being listened to. I looked at Quiet River. The old man kept working with his rope. Then, without looking up, he translated not word for word, but the shape of it. He says, "You came to our land. We gave you food and shelter and safety, and now you take something that was not offered to you." I looked at Black Bear. "I have taken nothing." Quiet River translated. Black Bear replied. His voice did not change register. He says the woman's attention, her time, these things are not yours. I held Black Bear's eyes and thought carefully about what to say next, because the wrong thing here was not just wrong, it was dangerous in a way that would make everything worse for everyone. "Tell him," I said slowly, "that I did not ask for her attention. She gave it, and there is a difference between the two." Quiet River translated. Black Bear was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, there was something new in his voice, not quite anger, something more controlled than anger, which was in some ways more concerning. He says, "Fight for her. Stand in front of me and prove you have the right to be here." I looked at him. He was a formidable man. That was simply the physical fact of the situation. I had fought in a war and I knew how to read threat, and this man was in the language of threat fluent. "No," I said. Quiet River translated. Black Bear's expression shifted, not dramatically, a tightening. He asks, "Are you afraid?" "Tell him," I said, "that I have already lost everything I loved in this life. There is not much left that I am afraid of." I paused. Tell him I will not fight him because beating a man does not prove anything about a woman's heart, and because I have seen enough of what violence takes away. I am not interested in adding to that account." Quiet River translated this slowly. Black Bear listened. His jaw was set hard. He looked at me for a long moment, and in that moment I saw something underneath the anger, something that looked, if I was reading it right, like pain. Real pain. The kind that does not have an easy object to throw it at. Then he turned and walked out of the enclosure. The gate swung behind him. Quiet River worked his rope. After a moment he said, without looking up, in the careful English he had revealed he possessed only gradually, "He is not a bad man." "I know," I said. "He has waited a long time." "I know that too." The old man tied a knot and examined it. "Waiting for something that will not come is a particular kind of pain," he said. "It does not make a man bad, but it can make a man—" He thought about the word. "Combustible." I looked at the gate where Black Bear had gone. "I know about that too," I said quietly. That evening, coming back from the river, I found something in front of my tent. A piece of cooked meat wrapped in leaves placed carefully on the ground. No note, no witness I could identify. But the footprints in the soft ground nearby were Black Bear's. I knew his gait by now. He walked with his right foot turning slightly inward, a distinctive impression. I stood and looked at it for a long time. Then I picked it up and went inside. I woke 3 nights later to the sound of a horse running hard in the dark. Not one horse, several. I sat up in my bedroll and I was fully awake before the first word was spoken outside. The old reflex, the thing the war had put into me that 11 years of farming had softened but not erased. My hand found the knife at my belt. There were voices outside, urgent, and then the percussion of the village shifting from sleep to alertness, the particular sound of a community that has lived long enough in dangerous country to know how to come awake fast. I pushed outside. A young man was in the center of the village, breathing hard, talking rapidly to the chief, who had appeared already dressed, already himself. Around them men were gathering. Women were moving children toward the inner structures. The air had changed, not the cold air of a winter night, something else, the charged quality of air before a storm. The young man pointed east. I looked for Moonlight. She appeared at my side as if she had been there all along. Her face was very still. She was watching her father. "What is it?" I said. She did not answer immediately. She was listening. Then she looked at me. The fire at the center of the village threw its light across her face, and in that light I could see something in her expression that I had not seen there before. It was not quite fear. It was the face of someone who has seen the shape of something approaching and is calculating very quickly what it costs. "Riders," she said, "from the east, many of them." She paused. "They are asking for a man with blue eyes." The cold that went through me then had nothing to do with the December air. I already knew. Somehow, the way you know certain things in the body before the mind confirms them, I already knew who was coming through the dark from the east and why and what they would do if they found me here. I stood in the firelight of a village that had given me food and shelter and the first human warmth I had felt in 4 months, and I understood that I had brought something terrible in with me when I came and that it was arriving now. Moonlight was looking at me. "You know who they are," she said. It was not a question. The drums began then. Somewhere at the edge of the village, a deep, steady sound that moved through the ground as much as the air that you felt in your chest before you heard it with your ears. The warriors were gathering. The horses were being readied. The village was coming to its feet. And on the eastern horizon, very faint, very far, but getting neither fainter nor farther, the orange pinpoints of torches moving through the dark like the eyes of something that had been looking for a long time and had finally found what it was looking for. "Yes," I said. "I know who they are. I have to tell you something about Wade Callum before I tell you what happened next. Not because he deserves the pages. He does not. But because I have spent enough years watching people turn the men who wronged them into something simple, into pure evil, clean and uncomplicated the way a story needs its darkness to be if it is going to make sense. I understand that need. I have felt it myself in the years when it would have been easier to carry what Wade did if I could have made him into something less than human. But he was human. That is the hardest part of it. I have to tell you what he was before he became what he became, not to excuse it. Nothing excuses it. But because the truth of a man is not only the worst thing he ever did, and because understanding how an ordinary person becomes capable of extraordinary cruelty is more important and more frightening than pretending that cruelty belongs only to monsters. Wade Callum came west from Tennessee in 1869, 2 years before I arrived on my claim. He had fought in the War Confederate, which made us something complicated on paper, though by the time we were neighbors, that had faded to a historical footnote neither of us brought up. The war was done. The land was what mattered now. He was a hard worker. That was genuinely true. He was up before dawn and still moving after dark, and his land showed it. The fences were tight. The barn was sound. The fields were cleared in a way that spoke of sustained and purposeful labor. He had plans. He was always talking about his plans, the new well. He was going to dig the additional acreage. He was going to claim the way the land along our shared creek would be worth a considerable sum once the railroad came through. The railroad. He talked about the railroad the way some men talk about salvation, as the thing that would transform everything, would make the work and the years and the distance from everything familiar finally, irrevocably worth it. He was not wrong about the railroad's value. He was right about that. What he could not tolerate was the waiting. I understand that now, though I did not then. Wade Callum was a man who had built his entire interior life around the expectation of a specific future. He had decided in the particular way that certain men decide things that he was owed an outcome. He had worked hard enough for long enough in hard enough country. He was owed the return. And when the railroad took longer than expected, when the land values did not rise on the schedule he had constructed for them in his mind, when other men's claims began to look like obstacles between him and the thing he was owed, something in him began to reorganize around a simpler logic. What he wanted, he would take. I think the first time he took something from someone else, I was not aware of it. There were stories, a dispute about a fence line with the Hendersons, a question about water rights with a man named Price, who had left the territory the following season. Things I heard and did not look at too closely, because looking at things too closely about your neighbors can make the life around you very complicated. I should have looked closer. He bided his time with me for 2 years. I know that he had looked at my land and my creek access and my 160 acres and had been calculating since almost the beginning. My land sat between his eastern fields and the route the railroad surveyors had walked twice in the summer of 1876. When the railroad came, whoever held that middle ground would be in a position to negotiate from strength. He wanted that position. He tried to buy my land first. This was in the spring of 1876, 6 months before the night of October 14th. He came to me with a price that was not insulting, not generous, but not insulting, and I told him I was not interested in selling. I was building something. I had a family. I had a porch to build in the spring. God help me, and I was not going anywhere. He nodded and drank his coffee and talked about other things and left, and I thought that was the end of it. It was not the end of it. I know all of this now. I have had years to piece it together from what I heard that night, from what people in the territory told me later, from the particular shape of the thing itself. Wade Callum went away from that conversation and started planning in earnest. He found men who were willing to be found. There were always such men in those years, men for whom the line between land dispute and outright violence had grown permeable. He waited for the right night. He waited until I had finished the harvest and banked the year's earnings and had no particular reason to be watchful. And then he came with fire. I am telling you all of this because I stood in the firelight of the village with the drums sounding and the torches moving on the eastern horizon, and I had to decide in very short order what to do with it. The simplest thing, the thing that had a certain kind of logic to it, was to leave. If I left, I led the danger away from the people who had taken me in. The village would be safe. Moonlight would be safe. I would be trading my safety for theirs, which was an exchange I could make without much interior debate, given what my safety was currently worth to me and what theirs was worth to me. I looked for Moonlight in the firelit dark. She was already looking at me. "Don't," she said. "You don't know what I'm thinking. You are thinking that if you leave, you will draw them away from us." Her voice was very level. "And you are thinking that this is a reasonable trade because you do not value yourself enough to consider that it is not." I looked at her. "You are not leaving," she said. "That is not what is going to happen." Before I could answer, Red Eagle was there. He had crossed the open ground between us with the unhurried deliberateness that was simply his way of moving through the world, and he stood before me now and looked at me for a moment with those measuring eyes. Then he spoke. Moonlight translated without looking at her father, her eyes still on me. "My father says, 'Tell me what you know about these men.'" I told them everything. We sat in the chief's structure, Red Eagle, Moonlight, Gray Cloud, who appeared without being summoned, and Black Bear, who arrived at the entrance and was not turned away. Outside, the drums continued their steady work and the village continued its preparation. Inside, I talked. I told them about the farm, about Sarah and Thomas, which I had not spoken of to anyone in this place except Moonlight, and which cost me something to say in front of these men, even though they received it with the gravity it deserved without performance or display. I told them about waking in the yard, about the smell of smoke and the particular gray light of a morning that should not have existed because nothing should have continued after that night, about picking up the rifle and putting it down again. I told them about the voice in the dark. "The man who leads them," I said. "His name is Wade Callum. He lived 3 miles east of my land for 5 years. He ate at my table. He held my son." I said it flat, without decoration. The flatness was necessary. If I let any feeling into my voice at that point, it would have taken the whole thing with it, and I needed to finish. "He killed my family to take my land. He left me for dead. He has been looking for me since October because I am the only person living who can put his name to what he did." Moonlight translated all of this. I watched Red Eagle's face while she spoke. He listened without interruption, without any change in his expression that I could read as judgment. He simply received what I was saying and held it. When Moonlight finished, there was a silence. Then the chief spoke. "My father asks," Moonlight said, "if you would recognize this man in the dark." "I would recognize his voice anywhere for the rest of my life," I said. Red Eagle nodded once. He spoke again. He says, "Then you will stand with our warriors tonight, not to fight unless fighting is necessary, to identify." I looked at him. "He doesn't have to do that. This is not his fight." Moonlight translated. The chief listened. Then he said something brief that she did not immediately put into English. She looked at me for a moment first as if deciding how to carry it. He says a man who carries a secret like that one for 4 months and does not put it down, who walks into a strange village and asks for nothing and works without being asked and talks to his horse and makes my daughter's heart speak for the first time in 5 years, that man is not a stranger. She paused. He says the fight arrived on our land. That makes it our fight. I did not answer right away. There was nothing adequate to say to that, so I said nothing. I looked at the fire between us and felt something move in my chest that was not grief, something I did not have an accurate name for, which was new. Most of what I had been feeling for 4 months had very accurate names. Then Black Bear spoke. It was the first time he had spoken since entering. Everyone in the structure looked at him. He was sitting across the fire from me, his elbows on his knees, his eyes on the ground between his feet. He spoke at some length, and whatever he said, the quality of attention it received from Red Eagle changed, became more focused, more still. I looked at Moonlight. She was listening to Black Bear with an expression I could not read precisely. Not surprise, something more complicated than surprise. When he finished, she looked at me. He says, she stopped, started again. He says that he has spent many weeks being angry at the wrong person. He says that a man who will not fight when provoked is either a coward or someone who has understood something about fighting that most men have not. She paused. He says he has been watching you, and he has concluded it is the second thing. I looked at Black Bear. He was looking at me now. His expression was not warm, it was not that kind of moment, and he was not that kind of man. But the hostility was gone. What was there instead was something direct and unadorned, the expression of a man who has made a decision and is stating it plainly. He said something else. Short. He says, "Tonight there are no outsiders." We had perhaps 2 hours before they arrived. The village used those hours efficiently. I had grown up around men who prepared for violence in the war preparation. Was everything the hours before battle more important than the battle itself? And what I saw in that village in those 2 hours was preparation of a high order, not frantic, deliberate. The women moved children to the structures at the village's back. The elders directed the placement of torches, the arrangement of barriers. The warriors moved with the quiet purposefulness of people who have done this before and know that noise in preparation is wasted energy. Quiet River found me at the horse enclosure. He handed me a bow quiver and a short-handled hatchet without a word. I looked at the bow. I had not held one since before the war. I had used a rifle in the army and a rifle on the farm, and I was competent with a rifle, but this was something else. The old man watched me examine it. "The bow is quieter," he said in his careful English. "I haven't used one since I was 16. "Then you will remember," he said. "The body remembers things the mind forgets." I looked at the enclosure. The horses were restless, feeling the change in the air, the way animals always feel change before people do. "Quiet River," I said. He waited. "I need you to know if this goes wrong, if anything happens tonight because of me. "Stop," the old man said, not unkindly. "What you carry is not something you put down with an apology. You put it down by what you do not, by what you say." He looked at the eastern horizon. "Tonight you will do something. That is enough." I nodded. He put his hand on my shoulder for a moment, brief like Moonlight's hand on mine by the river there, and gone before you could examine it too closely. Then he moved away into the dark. I found Moonlight near the edge of the village at the point where the firelight ended and the prairie dark began. She was looking east. The torches on the horizon were closer now, close enough to count if you tried. I counted 25. "You should be inside," I said. "So should you," she said. We stood for a moment looking at what was coming. "I want to tell you something," I said, "before whatever happens happens." She looked at me. "I came to this river because I had nowhere to go and no reason to go anywhere else. I was not looking for anything. You were right about that." I looked at the torches. "But somewhere in the weeks since you found me, I stopped, found the words. I started noticing the mornings, the way the light comes up over the eastern hills, the way Cooper's ears go forward when he hears me coming. Little things." I paused. I had not noticed a morning in 4 months, and then I started noticing them again, and I know exactly when that started, and I know why. She was very still. "I am telling you this now," I said, "because I do not know what the next few hours look like, and some things should be said while there is still time to say them." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "My mother used to say that the river does not worry about what is downstream. It only moves." "That's," I started. "I am telling you to move, Elijah," she said. "Whatever comes tonight, you keep moving." She held my eyes for a moment longer. Then she turned and went back into the village. I stood at the edge of the dark and watched the torches come. They arrived at the northern approach, which was where Red Eagle had expected them. The ground was flatter there, better for horses, the obvious choice for men who did not know the terrain and were relying on the logic of open ground. There were 25 of them. I had counted correctly from the torches. They came in loose formation the way men ride when they are confident in their numbers, not soldiers, not disciplined, but significant in weight and firepower. Most of them were carrying rifles. Their leader rode slightly ahead. Even in the dark, even at distance, even before he spoke a word, I knew him. The way a man sits a horse, is as individual as his face. The particular set of the shoulders, the angle of the head, the way the body distributes its weight in the saddle, these things do not change the way appearances can change, do not grow beards or lose weight or age into unfamiliarity. I had ridden alongside that silhouette for 5 years. I had watched it cross my yard, had seen it against the sky of 100 ordinary mornings. Wade Callum. Something happened in my chest when I saw him. Not quite what I expected, not the hot surge of anger I had imagined during the months I had carried his name in silence. Something colder and more specific than anger. Recognition and the particular nausea of being recognized in return, though he could not see me yet where I stood in the dark at the edge of the village. He pulled up his horse at the edge of the firelight. "We're looking for a man," he said. His voice carried easily in the cold night air. The same voice, businesslike, carrying the flat authority of someone who expects his words to organize the world around them. Blue Eyes answers to Elijah. "We have no quarrel with anyone here. Hand him over and we ride out." Red Eagle stepped forward into the firelight. He stood without visible urgency, without performance of any kind, simply present the way the land is present, without apology and without explanation. He looked at the 25 men on their horses and at their leader and said something in his own language. Moonlight was beside me in the dark, translating in a low voice I do not think she was aware she was producing. He says, "On this land, we do not discuss the surrender of those under our protection." Wade's horse shifted. "Your protection." The amusement in his voice was not warm. "That man is not your people." Red Eagle spoke again. Moonlight translated, "He says blood does not make a family. Actions do." There was a pause. Wade looked at the assembled warriors, 20-30 of them visible in the firelight, more in the dark behind. He was calculating. I could see it from where I stood, the recalibration happening behind his eyes. He had come expecting to find a wounded man among people who would not want the trouble. He had found something else. "I will give you one more opportunity," he said. And then I stepped into the firelight. I did not plan it. Or perhaps some part of me had been planning it since October, since the morning I woke in the ruined yard of my farm and picked up the rifle and put it down again. Perhaps what I was doing in that moment was finishing the conversation I had begun in that yard and had not been able to complete. I walked out of the dark and into the fire's reach, and I stood where he could see me. The silence that followed lasted perhaps 5 seconds. It felt longer. Wade Callum looked at me. I watched the recognition move across his face. I watched the sequence of it, the initial uncertainty, the adjustment, the arrival at certainty, and what certainty cost him. His horse felt it, the change in his body, and shifted again beneath him. "Elijah," he said, "just my name, the way you say a name when a name is all there is to say." "Wade," I said. 25 men on horseback, 30 warriors in the firelight and more in the dark, the cold December air, the drums that had gone silent when I walked out, the silence more present now than the sound had been. "You should be dead," he said. His voice had changed register, not the public voice of a moment ago, but something private and much colder. "I know," I said. "You did your best." Something moved in his face. "You don't understand what you got in the middle of." "I understand exactly what I got in the middle of," I said. "I understand that you looked at my land and you looked at your plans, and you decided that what you wanted was worth more than what I had. It wasn't personal." The words hit like something physical. I stood with them for a moment. "My wife," I said carefully. "My son. You want me to tell you that is not personal." He had the grace, if grace is the right word, not to answer that. "I know what you're going to say," he said after a moment. "You're going to say justice, law, what's right." "No," I said. He looked at me. "I am not going to say any of those things." I looked at him steadily. "I am going to tell you that you made a choice, and then you made more choices to protect the first one, and now you are here in a place you do not know in the dark, surrounded by people who have considerably more reason to be here than you do. And I am going to tell you that I am not going to fight you, Wade. I am not going to give you the satisfaction of making this into something that looks like two men with a dispute." His jaw tightened. "Then what are you going to do?" "I am going to stand here," I said, "and I am going to watch you make your choice." He looked at the warriors arrayed behind me. He looked at the structures of the village, the torches, the cold logic of a position he had arrived at with insufficient intelligence about what was waiting for him. I watched him calculate. A man who has lived by calculation knows when the numbers do not work. Then something else entered his face, something I had not expected. "You had everything," he said. It came out differently from everything he had said before, lower stripped of the business-like authority, almost like a statement he had meant to keep inside himself. "You had the land and the woman and the boy, and I had—" He stopped. "Nothing," I said quietly. "You had nothing, and you decided my nothing should be your nothing too." He looked at me for a long moment. The torchlight moved across his face. He was 45 years old, and he looked older than that. And I had a sudden and unwelcome thought, a thought I did not want and could not quite dismiss, that the man who had bided his time and planned and waited was also a man who had been lonelier than I had known, and that loneliness does not excuse anything, but it explains certain movements toward darkness that satisfaction might have redirected. I did not say that to him. Some truths are for your own understanding, not for the person who wronged you. Offering Wade Callum my compassion in that moment would have been a performance, and I had said I was done with performances. "Take your men," I said. "Go." He looked at me. "This is not finished," he said. "Wade." I met his eyes. "It is finished. You just have not accepted that yet." What happened next happened fast. One of his men, not Wade, a younger man near the back of the group who had been drinking, I think, or who had his own separate terror to manage, raised his rifle. The arrow that took it from his hand was moving before the rest of us had processed the threat. I looked. Black Bear was lowering his bow, and then everything was in motion, not the deliberate motion of a planned engagement, but the immediate necessary motion of survival. The horses of Wade's men spooked from the sudden arrow, and the drums that began again simultaneously, a calculation on the part of the warriors that I was not expecting, but immediately understood. Spooked horses take riders out of the fight whether or not the riders consent. The battle was not long. It was not clean either, and I will not dress it into something it was not. Men fought and were hurt. I fought, I held the bow in my hands, and I remembered what Quiet River had said about the body, and found he was right, the body does remember. I am not proud of what I did with that memory. I am not ashamed of it either. I did what the situation required of me, and I tried not to do more than that, which is perhaps the most honest thing I can say about any violence I have been part of. Black Bear was beside me for most of it. He appeared at my left side early in the chaos, and stayed there covering the angle I could not cover, moving with the efficiency of someone whose training had been specifically for this kind of dark engagement in known terrain against unknown numbers. At one point he pulled me sideways by the collar, and an instant later a horse came through the space where I had been standing. He did not look at me after that, just kept moving. Wade's men broke in the way men break when the night and the terrain and the knowledge that they have miscalculated all arrive at once. Not all at once, a few, then a few more, the departure of each one accelerating the departure of the next, until what had been 25 became 15 and then 10, and then a retreat that took the darkness with it, hoofbeats fading south and east. Wade was the last to go. He was unhorsed in the final minutes. His horse had bolted, and he was on foot at the edge of the firelight, and 2 warriors had him at that point, which was how he remained. He did not fight them. He stood with his hands at his sides, and he looked at me. I walked toward him. I stopped perhaps 6 feet away. We stood for a moment in the aftermath of everything, the dying sound of retreating horses, the crackling of a torch, the distant calling of voices checking on the wounded, the particular silence that arrives after violence when the violence has ended. His face was cut. He had lost his hat. He looked exactly as old as he was, and no older, which was older than I had remembered him in my mind during the months I had carried him as a name and a voice and a silhouette. He was just a man, damaged and frightened and responsible for the worst thing I had ever experienced, and just a man. I stood with all of that. My hands were at my sides. I was aware of the knife at my belt, the hatchet. I was aware of the weight of everything that man had taken from me every morning with Sarah, every conversation with Thomas, that I would not have the porch that was never built, the ordinary life that had gone up in smoke while I lay in the dirt. I was aware of all of it. And I thought of what Moonlight had said by the river the evening before all of this started. Keep moving, not keep fighting, not finish it. Keep moving. I thought of Thomas running through the wheat field in the dream, laughing at something I could not see, looking back at me once. I took a breath. Tie him, I said to the warriors beside him. He answers for what he did, but not here, not tonight. I turned away from Wade Callum. I turned away from him deliberately, completely, in the way you turn away from something you are choosing not to give any more of yourself to. Not forgiveness. I want to be clear about that. I did not forgive him that night, and I am not certain I have forgiven him in the years since. But I chose not to let the act of ending him be the last significant act of my life. I chose not to hand him that. I walked back toward the firelight. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, I recognized the feeling from the war, the body releasing what it had held tense for the duration of the threat. I put the bow under my arm and pressed my hands together until they stopped. The village was moving around me, people finding each other, checking wounds, the organized reassembly of a community after a disruption. I moved through it without clear direction, looking for something, and then I stopped. Moonlight was standing near the central fire. She was watching me come toward her with an expression I could not fully interpret in the uncertain light, something layered and careful, the expression of someone who has been watching a situation very closely and has arrived at a series of conclusions that she has not yet decided whether to share. I stopped in front of her. She looked at my hands, then at my face. "It's over," I said. My voice was rough. She looked at me for a moment. "Not all of it," she said. "No," I agreed. "Not all of it." Behind her across the open ground I could see Red Eagle watching us from the entrance of the main structure. His face was in shadow. I could not read his expression, but he was watching. And somewhere in the dark at the edge of the village, Black Bear was standing with his bow still in his hand, looking east at the place where the torches had gone. And beside him, close enough to be deliberate, a young woman I had not seen stand near him before, was standing, not speaking, just present in the way that presence sometimes is its own kind of statement. He did not look at her, but he did not move away. The drums were quieting. The cold night air settled back into stillness. The river somewhere to the west of the village was moving in the dark, the way it always moved south, continuous, carrying whatever was on its surface away toward somewhere none of us could see. I stood in the firelight of the village that had become something I did not yet have a word for, and I breathed in the cold air and my hands were still. "What happens now?" I said. Moonlight looked at me steadily. "Morning," she said. "Morning happens now." Morning took a long time to arrive. I know this because I was awake for all of it, the deep black hours after the fighting, the slow gray that preceded actual dawn, the first pale suggestion of light along the eastern ridge that was not yet day, but was the promise of it. I sat beside the central fire through all of those hours, and I watched the sky change, and I did not sleep. I was not alone. Others kept the same watch, warriors stationed at the village perimeter. Elders moving quietly between the structures, checking on the wounded gray cloud appearing and disappearing with the self-directed purposefulness of someone whose work does not stop because the crisis has. The village breathed around me in the particular way of a place that is tending to itself after damage, the sound of it different from ordinary night, more alert, more careful, like a hand held above a wound to feel whether the bleeding has truly stopped. Wade Callum was in one of the outer structures, bound and guarded by two warriors who had drawn the overnight assignment without visible complaint. I had looked in on him once, an hour after the fighting, and found him sitting against the wall with his eyes open and his jaw set in the expression of a man who is rebuilding something internally, recalculating, repositioning, trying to locate himself in a situation that had not gone the way he designed it. He looked at me when I came in. Neither of us spoke. I left. There were 7 wounded among the warriors, none dead, which Grey Cloud attributed to the terrain and the drums and the spooked horses with the matter-of-fact satisfaction of someone whose preparations had proven correct. 3 of Wade's men had been unhorsed and remained. The rest had fled south and east in the darkness. What became of them eventually is part of a longer story that mostly belongs to other people. I sat by the fire and I watched the sky. I was thinking about the porch. Not in a painful way, or not only in a painful way. I was thinking about it the way you think about a promise at the moment you understand finally and completely what the promise was actually about. Sarah had not wanted the porch for the wood of it or the shelter of it. She had wanted the thing a porch represents, the deliberate act of building a place to stop, to sit, to look at what you have and call it enough. I had spent 4 months in motion because motion was the only alternative to stopping and finding out what was underneath the stopping. And then a river had ended my motion for me, and a village had given me a place to be still, and in the stillness something had come back that I had not expected to recover. The ability to notice a morning. The sky went from gray to the pale, colorless white of earliest light, and then slowly the east began to warm. Not dramatically, no sudden blaze, no theatrical arrival, just a gradual brightening along the line of hills, a deepening of the blue overhead, and then the first actual color, a thin band of orange that widened as I watched it. I heard footsteps behind me. I knew them before I turned. I had learned the particular rhythm of those footsteps over weeks of afternoons by the river. Moonlight sat down beside me. She did not speak immediately. She looked at the fire which was burning low, and then at the sky which was beginning in earnest now. Around us the village was starting to stir, the first sounds of morning activity, someone feeding horses, the thin cry of a child, waking somewhere in the inner structures. We sat for a while in the quiet. "How many hurt?" she said finally. 7. "None badly, Grey Cloud says." She nodded. She is usually right. I have noticed that. Another silence. It was the comfortable kind, the kind that does not require filling, that exists between people who have gotten past the stage of using words to hold the space. "I have been sitting here thinking about a porch," I said. She looked at me. "Something I promised my wife, a place to sit and look at the river in the morning." I looked at the fire. "I never built it." "Why not?" "I kept finding other things that needed doing first, more urgent things, the kind of things that feel urgent until you run out of time for the thing you actually meant to do." She was quiet for a moment. "And you are thinking about it now." "I am thinking that I would like to build it," I said. "Eventually, when the time is right. Not the same porch, a different one in a different place." I paused. "I am thinking that I would very much like to have somewhere to sit in the mornings." She looked at me steadily. The growing light was on her face, the orange of it warm against her skin, and she was looking at me with the particular directness she brought to everything, not reading into what I had said, not ahead of it, just present with it, taking it for exactly what it was. "That is a reasonable thing to want," she said. "Yes," I agreed. "I think so too." The sun came over the hills then, not gradually, a specific moment when the light changed register from anticipation to arrival. It came across the prairie in a long, flat wave, touching the frost on the grass, catching the river to the west and turning it briefly to something that looked like hammered copper. I watched it come. Red Eagle called me to him mid-morning. The village had been moving through its post-crisis inventory, the practical business of accounting for damaged people resources, the organizational work of a community that has been disrupted and is returning to its own order. I had spent the morning with Quiet River and the horses which needed settling after the night's disturbance, and the familiar work had helped me locate myself in the day. When the summons came, I was not surprised. I had known it was coming. There were things that needed to be said in daylight that the night had not had room for. I washed my hands and face at the water basin near the horse enclosure and followed the young man who had come to find me across the open ground to the chief's structure. Red Eagle was inside. Moonlight was beside him, not as translator only I understood, but as herself, which was its own kind of statement about how he viewed her place and what was about to be said. Gray Cloud was there as well, sitting in her customary position near the fire, with her customary expression of having already known how this would go. Black Bear was there. I looked at him when I came in. He looked back. The thing between us had not resolved itself into anything as simple as friendship. I am not sure it ever did entirely, and I am not sure it needed to. It had resolved into something more durable than friendship, which is the particular regard that grows between men who have stood in a bad place together and neither of them ran. He was sitting with his arms on his knees, his bow laid to one side, his face carrying the composed weariness of a man who has been awake all night and is past the point where fatigue surprises him. I sat across the fire from the chief. Red Eagle looked at me for a long moment without speaking. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of a man who chooses his words with the care of someone who understands that words once released cannot be recalled. I had come to respect that about him. I had grown up in a world where men filled silence with words the way they filled empty ground with buildings reflexively, as if the emptiness itself were the problem. He spoke. Moonlight translated, and I will give you the translation. But I want to say first that something was lost in it, something in the sound of his voice, the particular weight he gave certain words that I heard clearly, even without the language. Some things carry across whatever distance exists between people without any bridge at all. He says, "You came to this river with nothing, not looking for anything, not asking for anything. Some men who come that way are dangerous. They have no purpose, and no purpose can be turned in any direction." He paused. Moonlight continued. He says, "But you were not that kind of nothing. You were the kind of nothing that comes from a man who has been emptied by something real. There is a difference. My wife Moonlight's mother, she could always see that difference. Moonlight sees it too. She has her mother's eyes for it." He looked at me steadily and continued. He says, "I watched you in the weeks you were here. I watched you work without being asked to work. I watched you with the horses, and the horses told me things about you that you did not say yourself." A pause. "I watched you refuse to fight a man who had every right to expect you to fight him. I watched you last night stand in front of something that came here because of you and not move away from it." Red Eagle reached inside his clothing. He brought out something that he held in his closed hand for a moment, held it with a deliberateness that suggested this was not a casual act that he was giving the object and the moment their appropriate weight before proceeding. Then he opened his hand. The necklace lay across his palm. Blue stone river smoothed hung on braided leather. I had seen it around his neck every day since I had arrived in the village. I had assumed without thinking much about it that it was simply what he wore. "This belonged to his father," Moonlight said. Her voice was carefully level, translated, not performed. "And to his father's father before that. It came to this family a long time ago from a river not unlike the one where you were found. It has been passed from chief to son for 3 generations. He spoke again. "He says my daughter rejected 100 men because not one of them made her heart speak. He is not angry about this anymore. He was angry for a time because a father worries, but he understands now that she was not refusing the men. She was waiting for what was worth not refusing." The fire crackled between us. He says, "You did not try to earn this. You did not come here with gifts or with stories of what you had done. You came here bleeding, and you covered your horse, and when you woke up you asked about the horse before you asked about yourself. He says that is the only kind of man worth trusting with something you cannot replace." Red Eagle stood. He crossed to where I was sitting. I stood too. He looked at me for a moment, looked at me the way I had seen him look at the horizon on the night the torches came measuring what was there against what was needed, finding them sufficient. Then he held the necklace out, not over my head, not placing it himself. He held it out flat in his palm. Offering. The distinction was deliberate. I understood it immediately. The choice was mine. I looked at the necklace. I looked at the man holding it. I looked at Moonlight, who was watching me with the expression she wore when she was being most exactly herself, open and direct and completely without artifice, the face of someone who has decided that the truth is always less costly than the alternative. I looked at Gray Cloud, who was watching me with the expression of someone who has already seen the end of a story and is patiently waiting for the middle to catch up. I looked at Black Bear. He was looking at the ground in front of him. His jaw set the posture of a man who has made a difficult peace with something and is holding it carefully because difficult pieces are fragile at the edges. But he was here. He had come and he had stayed, and that meant something I did not have adequate language for. I reached out and took the necklace from Red Eagle's palm. I put it around my neck. It settled against my chest. The stone was cool through my shirt for a moment, then warmed. Nobody said anything. Then Red Eagle put both hands on my shoulders briefly, firmly, the way my father had done when I was young, and he was trying to tell me something he did not have words for. Then he let go and turned to say something to Gray Cloud, and the moment was done, folded into ordinary life, the way significant moments always eventually are. I stood with the necklace against my chest and felt something settle in me. Not closure. I want to be careful about that word because it implies a door shut that I am not sure should be entirely shut. But a settling, the way a building settles when all the weight is finally distributed correctly. I felt present, not in the past, not in the 4 months of moving through the world like a ghost, not in the yard of the farm with the smoke still in the air. Here. This fire these people this morning. Here. I found Little Hawk outside. He was sitting on the fence rail of the horse enclosure watching the animals with the absorbed attention he brought to everything he found interesting, which was most things. He heard me coming and turned, and his face did the thing it always did when he saw me, a kind of full-body brightening the way children look at something that has specifically attached itself to their sense of wonder. He said something in his language. I had been learning it slowly, badly, with the persistent effort of a man who understands that language is not just communication, but admission into a way of seeing the world. I understood enough of what he said to follow the general direction. He was asking if the bad men were gone. Yes, I said. They're gone. He thought about this. Then he asked something else more complicated, and I lost part of it, but I caught enough. He was asking if I was going to leave now that the bad men were gone. I looked at the horses for a moment. Cooper was at the far end of the enclosure, standing in the morning light with his eyes half closed, the picture of an old horse that has decided the morning is acceptable. He was 22 years old and had carried me through a war and 4 months of nothing and a Kansas Territory autumn, and he showed no signs of being in a hurry to do anything differently. I looked back at Little Hawk. No, I said. I'm not leaving. He considered this with the seriousness he applied to information that mattered to him. Then he climbed down from the fence rail and walked over and stood beside me. Just stood there looking at the horses, his shoulder approximately at the level of my elbow, the particular companionship of a child who has decided that proximity is the appropriate response to something he cannot fully articulate. We stood like that for a while. "Your eyes," he said in careful English he had been practicing. I had learned without telling me he was practicing. "They look different today." I looked down at him. Different how? He thought about it. Before they were looking somewhere I could not see. Today they are looking here. I did not know what to say to that. I was not sure anything needed to be said. I put my hand on the top of his head, brief the way Quiet River had put his hand on my shoulder the night before, and then I looked back at the horses. "Cooper," I said. The old horse's ears came forward. "Good morning," I said. Little Hawk looked up at me sideways. "You talk to him. He listens. Does he understand?" "If you talk slowly enough," I said. "Yes." Little Hawk looked at Cooper with renewed appraisal, as if this confirmed something he had suspected. I went to find Black Bear in the afternoon. This was not a comfortable decision, but it was the right one, and I had spent enough years making comfortable decisions that were wrong to have developed a working distrust of comfort as a guide. He was at the edge of the village, sitting on a log at the southern perimeter, cleaning his bow with the methodical attention of someone who uses the task as an excuse to sit still and think. He heard me coming and did not look up, which I took as permission to approach. I sat on a rock nearby. For a while neither of us said anything. The afternoon was clear and cold, the sky that specific winter blue that looks like it goes all the way through the atmosphere without stopping, and the prairie to the south was empty and quiet and entirely itself. "I want to say something to you," I said. He looked up. He waited. "What you did last night, standing beside me." I paused, looking for the right shape for it. "I know it was not for me. You said so yourself, and I believe you. It was for your village, your people. That is the right reason." I looked at him directly. "But I was there, and you were beside me, and I am not going to pretend that it was nothing just because the reason behind it was larger than me." He looked at me for a long moment. His expression was not warm. I have said this before, and it remains true. There was a quality to him that warmth was not the natural expression of the way certain landscapes are not warm, but are genuinely beautiful in a way that warmth would diminish. What was there instead was attention, full and undeflected. He said something, then seemed to realize I had not caught it and shifted to the English that I had not known he possessed until Quiet River revealed it. His English was not Moonlight's English, hers was precise and deliberate learned. His was rougher, acquired from contact and trade, the English of a man who had learned it as a tool rather than a language, but it was sufficient for what he meant to say. "You did not fight me," he said, "when I asked you, when I called you afraid." "No." "Why?" I thought about how to answer that honestly. Because I had already been in a war. I had already learned what fighting proves and what it doesn't prove. And what it doesn't prove, I paused. It doesn't prove anything about what a woman sees when she looks at you. That was never going to be settled with fists. He was quiet for a moment. "I was angry. I know. I am still—" He stopped, started again. "Some of it is still there." "That is honest," I said. "I appreciate the honesty." "She was never going to choose me," he said. It was not a question. "I know that now. I knew it before somewhere. But the knowing and the feeling of it are different things," I said. "Yes." We sat for a moment with that. "You are a good man," I said. "I mean that with no other motive than that it is true. What you did last night took something real, and what you did before that—" I thought of the meat left in front of my tent in the dark, the footprints in the mud. "That took something too." He looked at me. The corner of his jaw moved. Then he looked back at the prairie. "You saw that," he said. "Yes. I did not intend for you to see it." "I know. That is partly why it mattered." Another silence. The wind moved through the grass to the south, a long, low sound, and then settled. "The woman," Black Bear said after a while. I looked at him. "The one who stood near me last night," he said. He was looking at the middle distance at some point on the horizon that was not anything specific. "She has stood near me before. I had not noticed." I said nothing. I waited. "I had been looking in one direction for so long," he said slowly, "that I did not see what was in the other directions." "That happens," I said. He looked at me. Something in his expression shifted, not quite a smile. Something more economical than a smile. The expression of a man who has arrived at a thought that is both painful and clarifying, and is making his peace with both qualities. "You are not what I expected you to be," he said. "What did you expect?" "Less," he said simply. I looked at the prairie. "I am not sure I am more. I think I am just different from the category you had put me in." He considered this. "Perhaps that is enough." We sat for a little while longer. Then he stood, picked up his bow, and walked back toward the center of the village. He did not say goodbye. That was not his way. But before he turned, he looked at me once more, a direct look, brief, the kind that does not require commentary. I looked back. That was all. In the evening, Gray Cloud asked me to come to her. She was in her tent, her working space, the place that smelled of dried plants and fire and the particular earned gravity of a very old woman who has seen a great many things and sorted them into what matters and what does not. She was sitting by her small fire doing something with her hands, weaving something, a pattern I could not follow. I sat across from her. She did not speak for a while. Her hands kept moving. The fire made its small sounds. Then she said something in her own language, and she said it slowly with the spacing she had observed me use when I was learning, the pause between words that gives the listener time to find the meaning. I understood more of it than I expected to. I had been learning for weeks, and understanding comes in waves, nothing, 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 and then suddenly, more than you thought you had. She was saying something about Moonlight's mother. I caught the shape of it, that the mother had also seen things in people that others could not see. That this was not a skill exactly, more a quality, the way certain rivers run clear because of the particular stone they travel over. That the mother had chosen according to what she saw and had been right to choose it. That Moonlight was her mother's daughter. Then she said something I did not catch, and she saw me lose it, and she said it again more slowly. She was saying that she had waited 30 years to see Moonlight's face look the way it looked now, and that in her experience 30 years was not too long to wait for the right thing. I sat with that for a moment. Then I said in her language, with the awkwardness of a man using a tool he has not yet learned to hold correctly, "Thank you for healing me." She looked up from her weaving. She looked at me, really looked the way she always looked, as if the surface of a person was simply the beginning of the information. Then she said something brief that I understood completely. That part was simple. The rest you did yourself. She went back to her weaving. I stayed for a little while, and then I went out into the evening. Moonlight was by the river. I had known she would be. We had our habits by then, the accumulated minor rituals of two people who have spent enough time together in the same place to have developed a geography of where each one goes when they need to think. The river was running dark in the last light, the color of iron, moving south with the patient momentum of something that has been moving in that direction for longer than any of us have been keeping track. The cottonwoods were bare now, the gold of them gone, the branches making their winter architecture against the pale sky. She heard me coming and did not turn. I sat beside her on the bank. For a while we just looked at the water. "My father likes you," she said. "He has an unusual way of showing it." "He showed it exactly the way he shows everything important," she said. "Carefully, with the correct weight." She paused. "He gave you the necklace." "He gave me the choice of it," I said. "That is not the same thing." She looked at me. "No, it is better." The river moved past us. Somewhere upstream, a bird made a sound. Once, then silence. "I want to ask you something," I said. "You can ask." "When you didn't run, when you found me on the bank." I looked at the water. "You told me why. The horse. And I believe you. But I have been thinking about it since, and I wonder if there was something else." She was quiet. "I wonder," I said slowly, "if part of it was that you recognized something. Not me specifically. You had never seen me before. But something in the situation." She was quiet for a long time after that. The river moved. Somewhere in the bare cottonwoods a bird shifted on its branch, invisible in the dark branches against the darkening sky. Then she said, not quite looking at me, "Black Bear believes you stayed because of me." "I know," I said. "The village believes it too. They think you saw me and decided to remain." She paused. "It makes a neater story." "Yes," I agreed. "It does." She looked at me then, full on the way she looked at things she was genuinely trying to understand. "Is it true?" I thought about that carefully. Moonlight had always been able to tell the difference between a considered answer and an automatic one, and this question deserved the considered kind. "No," I said finally. "Not the way they mean it." She waited. "The first week," I said, "I stayed because Cooper's leg needed rest, and I had no destination that required urgency. The second week, I stayed because Quiet River did not ask me to leave, and because the work in the enclosure was something I knew how to do, and doing something you know how to do is easier than figuring out what comes next." I looked at the river. The third week I started noticing the mornings, the way the light came up differently here than anywhere I had been. The way the horses moved in the cold. I paused. "That was when you started to be the reason." "But not before." Not before. She was quiet for a moment, turning this over. That is a strange thing to say to a woman, she said finally. Most men would not admit it. Most men would be trying to impress you, I said. I stopped trying to impress anyone a long time ago. It takes more energy than I have. Something moved at the corner of her mouth. You stayed because your horse was lame and an old man did not chase you away. To begin with, yes. And then I had already stayed long enough that leaving felt like a choice. And I looked at what leaving would mean, going back to the trail, going back to the nothing, and I found I did not want to. I looked at her. You were the reason the mornings changed. But the mornings were the reason I was still there when they changed. Those are two different things. She looked at the river for a long time. I know, she said at last. I knew it was not the story everyone was telling. I could see it when I looked at you. You were not looking at me the way a man looks at a woman he has decided to pursue. You were looking at me the way a man looks at something he did not expect and does not yet know what to do with. That is accurate, I said. It is why I trusted you, she said. A man pursuing something always leans toward it. You were not leaning, you were just there. I thought about that. And that was enough, I said. She picked up the stone she had been holding and turned it once in her fingers. Then she set it down. A man who is just there, she said, is rarer than you would think. A person who had been emptied by something real. I paused. Because I think you know what that feels like. Not the same thing, but the shape of it. She looked at the river for a long time. 5 years, she said finally. Saying no to 100 men. Do you know what that feels like from the inside? Tell me. It does not feel like pride. From the outside I know that is what they saw, pride, stubbornness, a woman who thought too much of herself. But from inside, she picked up a stone from the bank. It feels like being unable to lie. Like some part of you knows so clearly what is not true that it cannot pretend otherwise. Even when pretending would be easier. Even when you are tired. She turned the stone in her fingers. My mother was the same way, she said. Gray Cloud tells me. She could not pretend either. She saw things, and what she saw was what was real, and she could not act against what was real. She set the stone down. It is not always a comfortable quality. No, I said. I imagine not. But it means, she said, that when something is true, when what you see in someone is actually there and not invented, it is very clear. There is no question. I looked at her. She looked back at me. When I looked at you on the bank, she said, I saw someone who had been taken apart completely, down to the last thing. She held my eyes, and I saw that the last thing was still good. I did not answer for a moment. The last thing, I said. The part that covered the horse, she said. When everything else was gone. That part was still there. The river moved between us and the other bank. The last of the light was going from the sky, the west, deepening through orange into the particular red that winter evenings get the color of something beautiful at the end of its day. I made a promise to my wife, I said. A long time ago. A porch to sit on in the mornings. She waited. I would like to build something like that here, I said. Not the same thing, but something with the same intention. A place to be in the mornings, to look at the river. Moonlight was quiet for a moment. That would take time, she said. Building something like that. Yes. Wood. Tools. Someone who knows this land well enough to know where to put it. Yes. You would need to stay, she said. Yes, I said. I would. She looked at the river. Then she looked at me. Then she did something I had not seen her do before. Not fully, she smiled. Not the corner of the mouth movement I had catalogued in the weeks since I arrived, but an actual smile, complete, the kind that changes the whole character of a face. It was not a small thing to see. Then you should stay, she said. I want to tell you what the years brought because you deserve to know the shape of what came after. Not in great detail, some things belong to the living of them more than the telling, but the outline of it. Wade Callum was taken by the territorial authorities the following spring when the ground was passable again for travel. I gave testimony. Other men gave testimony. Turns out Wade's activities on my land were not his first, only his most extreme, and there were others who had been waiting for someone to speak first. He was convicted in the fall of that year. I was not present for the sentencing. I had decided by then that the part of my life that had Wade Callum at its center was concluded, and that attending his legal end would be giving him more of my presence than he had earned. I built the porch in the spring, not the one I had promised Sarah that was hers, and it belonged to a place and a life I held with love and let stand separate from this new one. I built a different porch, a smaller one, on a structure that Quiet River helped me raise on the eastern side of the village, close enough to the community to be of it and close enough to the river to hear it on quiet mornings. I learned the language. This took longer than I wanted it to, and not as long as I feared. Language, I discovered, is mostly a matter of willingness, of being willing to be wrong and corrected, and wrong again, to sound like a child in front of people whose opinion matters to you, to reach for meaning across a distance, and trust that the reaching itself communicates something even when the words fail. We set the date in the spring, working around the rhythms of the village calendar and the planting and Quiet River's opinion about the horses, which he offered without being asked, and which turned out to be correct, as his opinions generally were. The day we chose was a Tuesday. I did not choose it for that reason, but I noticed, and I did not change it. Moonlight and I were married in the summer, in the way of her people, which was the right way for us in that place. Her father conducted the ceremony with the ceremonial gravity he brought to everything important and the private warmth he reserved for things that were his and not for general display. Gray Cloud attended and said very little, which was exactly what we expected. Black Bear attended as well. He sat at the edge of the gathering with a woman I had seen standing near him the morning after the battle, a woman named something I will render as still water, because the translation is not exact, but the quality is right. She sat beside him at the gathering, and he sat beside her, and they were not demonstrative about it because that was not how either of them moved through the world, but they were there together, and when I caught his eye across the fire, he looked back at me with that direct and complicated regard that was the particular language between us. I nodded. He nodded. That was all it needed. Little Hawk grew up. He grew up the way boys do, in places that ask something real of them, with capability and humor and a quality of attention that made him formidable in negotiations and good to have beside you in difficult situations. He learned English from me, and I continued learning his language from him, and for a long time neither of us was sure who was teaching whom, which is perhaps the right condition for that kind of exchange. He called me father eventually, not because anyone told him to, because one morning he was telling me something and he used the word and then looked at me sideways to see how I received it, the way you test weight-bearing before you trust it. And I received it without comment. And that was that. I am not going to pretend that did not cost me something. It cost me something, and it gave me something, the way the real things always work both ways simultaneously. I close the journal now. The candle has burned through a third time tonight, and I have lit another one, and the night outside has gone from deep dark to the particular quality that means morning is not far. I can hear the river. I can hear Cooper Old now, improbably old, standing in the enclosure that smells of hay and horses and long use, that specific warmth that cold nights make more obvious. I sit with the journal closed in my hands, and I hold the necklace against my chest, and I think about a young man who lay down beside a river one autumn afternoon and did not have enough left in him to understand that the lying down was not the end of the story, only the end of the first part. The footsteps come again. The door opens. Moonlight, taller in her sleep clothes than she seems in the day, somehow carrying 2 cups. The steam rises from them in the cold air of the room. She sees me looking at the journal and does not comment on it because after all these years she has learned the geography of this night and knows what it asks of me and what it gives back. She sits beside me, gives me one of the cups. The tea is the kind Gray Cloud taught her bark, and something else, the recipe I still do not fully know and have stopped trying to extract. It tastes of the place we live. It tastes of here. You were up all night, she says. Yes. Did you write everything you needed to write? I look at the journal. I think so. Good. She looks at the window, which is showing the first gray of the coming morning, the sky beyond the glass beginning to lighten in the slow and patient way it always does. Come outside in a little while. The river is good in the morning after a cold night. I know, I say. I have noticed. She looks at me. Then the look I have been the recipient of for enough years now that I know its every variation, and this one is the particular variation that contains everything she thinks about me, the whole complicated and honest assessment of a woman who has never once pretended to see anything other than what is actually there. I look back. Outside the morning is coming the way it always comes, steadily, without asking permission, spreading across the prairie from the east in the patient and indifferent and entirely beautiful way of something that has been doing this since before any of us arrived and will keep doing it long after we are gone. I set the journal down on the table. I set the necklace down beside it, the blue stone smooth and warm that has been a chief's and a father's and now mine, the stone that the river made over years of patient work, shaping it into something that could carry meaning. I pick up my cup. I look at my wife. Let's go outside, I say. We go out onto the porch. The air is cold and clean, the kind of cold that clarifies everything it touches. The frost on the grass catches the first light and holds it 1,000 small fires, each one brief, each one complete. The river to the west is dark still, but moving, always moving, the sound of it, the steady and consistent sound of something that does not stop for anything, that has not stopped since before the first word was spoken in any language about any of the things that matter to us. We stand side by side on the porch I built. We look at the river. The sun comes up. I did not believe in fate, but I have looked at the sequence of things, the horse's sprained leg, the particular bend of the river, the afternoon she chose to gather herbs on that specific bank, and I have understood that the difference between a life and an ending is sometimes nothing more than a series of small accidents that add up to something that feels from the far end of it like it could not have gone any other way. Maybe it could have gone another way. Maybe there are versions of this story where I kept walking, where the horse's leg healed faster and we moved north before November, where she had been on a different part of the bank that afternoon or not there at all. I try not to think about those versions. I think instead about what actually happened, about a man who ran out of reasons and lay down beside a river, and a woman who did not run. And the morning, this morning, every morning that keeps arriving, whether any of us deserve it or not, patient and indifferent and entirely stubbornly here. The river remembers everything that has passed through it. I believe that now. I believe it keeps us,